This video is about a future courtroom where the verdict is almost certainly correct and nobody in the room understands why. Let me introduce you to something OpenAI experimented with. They built a system where two AI agents would receive the same question, then debate the answer in front of a human judge. Each AI's job was simple: convince the judge while simultaneously tearing apart the other's reasoning. Think of it like forcing two detectives to argue opposite sides of a case, except these detectives can process information faster than any human ever could. The logic behind this seems almost elegant at first. We've always known that complex truths are difficult to verify alone. A scientist publishes a paper, but peer review catches the flaws. A lawyer makes an argument, but the opposing counsel finds the holes. Competition, in other words, has historically been our method for surfacing what's hidden. OpenAI's bet was that if you can't trust one AI to be honest, maybe you can trust two to expose each other's dishonesty. And in those early toy experiments, something fascinating happened. When debating simple factual questions, a weaker model could actually expose flaws in a stronger model's reasoning. The human judges, when forced to compare two structured explanations side by side, often identified the better argument. Debate made reasoning more transparent, at least on the surface. Right now, when you're charged with a crime, you'll probably hire a human lawyer. The stakes feel too high to trust a machine with your freedom. But what happens when the prosecution, overwhelmed with cases and limited budgets, starts delegating more responsibility to AI systems? And what happens when the statistics start coming back, showing those AI systems are winning more cases, making tighter arguments, finding precedents faster than any human possibly could? You might resist at first, you might say you'd still choose the human, but then the data arrives for the big trials, the murder cases, the ones where everything is on the line, and the numbers show that the humanoid AI standing in the courtroom, making logical cases built on thousands of analyzed precedents, is simply more effective than the human lawyer. Would you still refuse the robot if refusing meant accepting a statistically lower chance of winning your freedom? When DNA testing became reliable, courts had to confront something strange. Statistical probability became more persuasive than human testimony. Juries had to trust math they could not personally derive, and over time that math overturned hundreds of wrongful convictions. Take this one step further. Consider it from the judge's perspective. Once both the prosecution and defense are using AI systems, do you really need two separate entities at all? Or is the courtroom just a theater for presenting arguments for and against, a structured way of surfacing every relevant angle? And here's where the first thread appears, one we'll return to shortly. What if the judge starts using AI to review decisions in hindsight and discovers obvious errors that human judgment missed? And at the same time, here's the second thread, equally important. What if we find that the most accurate method is also the method that removes our ability to comprehend what happened? Both of these questions will matter before we're done. Let me give you a different example, something from my own thinking about this. Imagine you're trying to solve a maze, but the maze is three-dimensional, constantly shifting, and contains a million possible paths. You could spend your entire life trying to understand every turn, or you could send two explorers into the maze who move at 1,000 times your speed, who map every dead end simultaneously, who argue about the optimal route in a language you can barely follow. When they emerge and tell you which path to take, you'd have no idea why that path is correct. You'd just know that statistically, following their advice leads to the exit more often than your own judgment ever did. This is essentially what happens when we optimize for accuracy over comprehension. Someone gets charged with murder, you feed two AI systems all the evidence. You speed up their processing and simulate locking them in a room for what would be the equivalent of 1,000 years of argument. They analyze every witness statement, every forensic detail, every legal precedent, every logical pathway. Then you give it to a judge AI that sits with all of that argumentation for another 1,000 years of simulated time. And when it finally outputs a verdict, that verdict is demonstrably more accurate than human judgment. Fewer innocent people go to jail, fewer guilty people walk free. But here's the catch. You'll never have time to review it. You'll never be able to trace the reasoning. You won't be different from someone who asks an LLM to complete a complex task right now and then tries to genuinely understand every step of how it arrived at the answer. The process becomes a black box that happens to be statistically superior to the transparent box we've been using for centuries. So what do you do when the math says the most effective approach is the one that removes all comprehension and agency from us? On one side, you have the principle of justice. the idea that innocent people shouldn't suffer for crimes they didn't commit, that accuracy matters more than anything else when someone's freedom or life is at stake. On the other side, you have the principle of understanding, the idea that justice loses meaning if the people it's supposed to serve can't comprehend how it works, that we sacrifice something essential about human dignity when we surrender our agency to systems we can't interrogate. Sometimes it might feel like we're being forced to choose between control and accuracy, between comprehension and effectiveness. But maybe that's the wrong framing entirely. Maybe the question isn't whether we accept AI systems in courtrooms, but rather how we design the transition so that we don't sleepwalk into a future where verdicts arrive from processes we can't question. Consider what happened with the OpenAI debate experiments. They didn't just reveal that AI systems could argue effectively, they also revealed that the system depends heavily on the judge's competence. Debate doesn't guarantee truth, it only guarantees better surfaced reasoning, and only if the person evaluating that reasoning has the capacity to tell the difference. This matters because it points toward a different possibility, not AI replacing judges entirely, but AI assisting human judgment in ways that remain transparent and comprehensible. Let me return to those two threads I mentioned earlier. First, the idea that AI might catch errors human judges miss. That's already starting to happen in limited ways, with algorithmic review of sentencing patterns, revealing biases we didn't know existed. But catching errors after the fact is different from making the initial judgment. The second thread about the most accurate method, removing our comprehension, that's where the real danger lives. Because once we have evidence that the black box works better, the pressure to use it becomes almost irresistible. What can we do about this? Maybe we start by recognizing that accuracy and comprehension don't have to be in perfect opposition. We could imagine systems where AI handles the computational heavy lifting, the analysis of thousands of precedents, the cross-referencing of evidence, but then translates that work into arguments humans can actually evaluate. We could imagine courtrooms where the debate happens at AI speed, but the results get summarized in ways that preserve human oversight. We could imagine a future where we use these tools to enhance judgment rather than replace it, but we'd have to choose that path deliberately. We'd have to resist the temptation to optimize purely for outcomes, to chase the statistically perfect system, even when it means surrendering our understanding. Because the moment we do that, we're not just changing how justice works, we're changing what justice means. Think about what happens in that simulated room where two AIs argue for 1,000 years. From their perspective, they're engaged in something like reasoning. From our perspective, it's incomprehensible. And somewhere in that gap between their experience and ours, something essential might get lost. Not just our ability to understand the verdict, but our ability to feel that we participated in reaching it, that justice was something done with us rather than to us. The future isn't arriving slowly, and it's not waiting for us to figure out the answers before it shows up. These questions about AI and judgment and comprehension, they're not hypothetical anymore. They're already here, just in smaller forms, in bail algorithms and sentencing recommendations, and legal research tools that work faster than any human could. And when that future fully arrives, when someone you care about stands in a courtroom and faces a choice between a human lawyer and a statistically superior AI, when the prosecution and defense are both algorithms and the judge is weighing arguments that took 1,000 simulated years to construct, will you even recognize it as justice? Or will it be something else entirely, something we never quite found the words to name before we built it? Because the future isn't coming slowly, it's arriving instantly, and most people will only realize it when they're standing in that courtroom watching two AIs argue for 1,000 years, knowing the verdict will be more accurate than any human could produce, and having absolutely no idea what justice means anymore.